Welcome to The Long Road. I'm your host, Chris Roberts. Boy, what a difference a week makes. Last week we're up at 86 degrees, and tonight we're looking for a low of 14. Again, this is New England, and you can't mess around with Mother Nature. She can fool you. 75, 86 degree record heat. Then bingo, right back and saying, hey, it's still the first week of spring, so I still rule. It was a pretty good week up in Concord last week. Marriage equality, we don't have to worry about it going to the Senate or the governor's veto in coming back. It was overwhelmingly, defeated. And so basically, at least for the next 3 years, people in New Hampshire will be able to get married. Same-sex couples, for whatever reason they so choose, they can get married. In 3 years, I suspect by that time, the Supreme Court will make a decision on the constitutionality of same-sex marriage. Right now, Proposition 8, which is California, which was to outlaw same-sex marriage, is making its way up through the court system. The appellate court said, hey, you can't do that because you can't take rights away from people. And in California, they were given the rights, just like New Hampshire, they were given the rights, and other voters tried to take them away. That was one of the reasons people had a serious problem with the referendum. First, New Hampshire is not a referendum state. Second, New Hampshire is the third largest legislature, as we like to brag. And we were trying to go for cover and say, hey, you know what? Let's let the voters decide. So if the voters decide not to, we're covered. If the voters decide yes, we can go and say we're doing what the voters want. You know, a little cowardness on our part. Excuse me. And basically, it went down to an overwhelming defeat. But while everyone is clapping with joy, while I don't appreciate Speaker O'Brien as a person, I have to respect his Machiavellian principles. He pulled one right out of Karl Rove's book. He knew he was going to get defeated, and he figured, what can I do? How can I make it worse? How much I can make it better? So he had a game plan. While we had lobbyists who said, well, it's going to be close, while we had Democratic leadership says, hey, it's going to be close, let's stop preparing for the governor's veto. He undercut the Democrats' legs, and he undercut the lobbyists' legs. His leadership went and said no. People who voted no against same-sex marriage this time stood up on the floor and defended same-sex marriage. He sent a young lady up to talk about against same-sex marriage. He then went and sent another young Republican to talk as a religious person to why he believes in same-sex marriage. At the last minute, they limited debate to 10 minutes on each side. No Democrat got up to talk. The Democrats would decided, you know what, let's just let them fight among themselves. Again, because the Democratic leadership said, hey, it's really no big deal. We'll just wait for the veto process. So in O'Brien's way, one, you look at it, classic Machiavellian, plain and simple. One, this is now off the table. The Senate doesn't have to deal with it. He doesn't have to deal with the veto and being dragged out, so it doesn't get closer and closer to become an election issue. And they were able to get their stories on both sides of the aisle for them. Second, he was able to save a lot of Republicans who were going to be in a tight re-election campaign, so they were allowed to vote to continue same-sex marriage. And then also he was able to throw Representative Bates and plus, or he called his radical right under the bus, saying, hey, yes, you may be Republicans, but you're not part of the group, and you're not the New Hampshire way. And so he was able to vote against same-sex marriage, get the benefit of same-sex marriage, and voting that way. But again, he sliced out the people of the party that he knew could cause some damage to the party in the upcoming election. So basically, again, whether you like O'Brien or not, you can't underestimate his political abilities. Plain and simple. If you want to understand Speaker O'Brien, look at Karl Rove. It's always about winning and getting the best out of your losses. And when it comes to same-sex marriage, O'Brien couldn't have worked it better. It would have been classic. You would have to, if you were going to political science class, you would have to study how he took something that, like I said, that was going to win, and it was going to get overturned by the governor's veto, and he knew there was no way he could win. In the end, he came out a winner, and Mr. Bates has come out as the loser. And the Democrats got no benefit whatsoever from it because they sat on the sideline and didn't raise a single word. Okay, now so out of Concord, then you've heard over and over again about the incident down in Florida with that young man, 17-year-old kid that got killed. The New Hampshire self-defense one I had talked about in the past is basically the same thing. If you feel intimidated, you have a weapon, and you shoot somebody and you claim self-defense, we're not able to question you to, in fact, was self-defense. So if there's no witnesses, it's your word against the other person, but the other person is dead. So as we say, his words will go silent. And some people say it's a Second Amendment right. Well, the Second Amendment says that a well-armed militia, not everybody is in the militia. Second is, not everybody has the right to own a weapon. We don't allow felons to own weapons. Well, again, in New Hampshire, lucky they were voted down, but some people said, hey, due to the Second Amendment, once a felon does his time, as long as it wasn't a violent crime like murder or rape or other sex offense, they should be able to own a weapon after a certain amount of time. Well, it makes, I don't know how to explain it. And so felon, there's a reason. If in some places, if you're a convicted felon, you lose the right to vote. You lose the right to bear arms. That's part of, you made a decision, you made a bad decision, and I think you forfeit your rights, and I don't agree that felons should have weapons. Yeah, you can argue that in the past, someone who bounced a check for $250 was a felon. Well, those are case by case. They can take it to court. They can find ways to do it. And as a judge, the judge is not mandatory what they have to do. The judge is there to judge. The judges have discretion. Now I'm going to move on to an article that was in the August 2001, The Atlantic magazine. Excuse me. And it's an article, How to Turn Democrats and Republicans into Americans. It was written by former Congressman Mickey Edwards. And it was pretty enlightening. And he goes, if we are truly a democracy, if voters get to size up candidates for the public office and choose the ones they want, why don't the elections seem to change anything? Because we elect leaders and then they govern in a system that makes cooperation almost impossible, a system where the campaign season never ends and the struggle for party advantage trumps all other considerations. So here it is. Nancy Pelosi, when she took over as Speaker of the House, and Mitch McConnell took over as the Senate Republican leader, they were asked the question, what would their priorities would be. Their priorities were not the deficit. They were not debt. It was not the two wars. It wasn't about rebuilding our highway system. It wasn't about jobs. It wasn't about how to improve American education system. Nancy Pelosi said that her number one priority was to elect more Democrats. That was in 2008. After Republican victories in 2010, the Senate Republican leader said it was to prevent the Democratic president from getting reelected. So when you look at all the problems that we as Americans are facing, it's no different. The Democrat said, my priority is not America. My priority is not any of the things I listen, not the recession, not what's going on, not Social Security, not health care, not Medicare. My job is to elect more Democrats. Mitch McConnell, 2 years later, again, none of these was his priority. Not even spending $112 billion in Iraq, another $60, $70 billion in Iran, Afghanistan, Freudian slip maybe. So, $175 billion for an example, and saying, hey, those are not my priorities. 6,000 American soldiers and Marines and servicemen killed. That's not my priority. My priority is to make sure President Obama doesn't win re-election. Somehow, that's why we're in the situation we're in. The other part, and by 1916, all but a handful of states had instituted the direct primary system, under which a party candidate was selected by a public vote rather than party leaders in the backroom deals. But the primaries and the nomination conventions were open only to party members. This reform was supposed to give citizens a bigger role in the election process. Instead, the influence of party leaders have been supplanted by that of a subset of party activists who are often ideological and largely uninterested in finding common ground. In Delaware in 2010, a mere 30,000 of the state's nearly 1 million people kept Mike Castle, a popular congressman and a former governor, off the general election ballot. In Utah, 3,500 people meeting in a closed convention deprived the rest of the state's 3 million residents of an opportunity to consider re-electing their longtime Senator Robert Bennett. For most of the voters who go to the polls in November, the names on the ballots have been reduced to only those candidates that the political parties will allow them to choose between. America demands a multiplicity of options in almost every other aspect of their life, and yet we allow small bands of activists to limit our choice of people to represent us in making the nation's law. And that's one of the big problems with the primary system. And for example, if I wanted to run for state senate, I can't. I could, but my chances of going any place is basically slim to none. I'm not a wealthy person. I don't have $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 of my own money to put in, because if I'm not one of the chosen ones by the political party, I'm not getting any money. Former Representative Jay Finnessy, I think he was in Senate District 8. He was thinking of running for Speaker of the House. And so doing the inside and backside doors with the state party, and he said, hey, they convinced him to run for Senate, and they said, we'll support you, the whole works. He ran for Senate, and they decided, you know what? You're going to have to raise your own money. The state party's not going to give you any money. And then the week of the election, the governor came out and endorsed the Republican the public incumbent. And so, but that's the way the party system goes. If I decided I wanted to run for Congress, I couldn't do that. Because the individual for Congress was picked 2 years ago. She lost, but it was already determined that she would have the right to run again. And again, last time I heard it, she was pretty close to $1 million in her war chest. So again, how can anybody, if you're not the chosen one by the party, come up and run? If you don't have that money in your pocket, you can't run. And that's sad. And that's one of the reasons why I think we get a really crappy government, because if I was the chosen one by the state party, and the state party and the national party poured in millions of dollars for me, and the only reason they're going to pour millions of dollars in for me is if I go to status quo. If I stop thinking, I do what I'm told, I get rewarded with the money. And again, if I was to do that, I would get rewarded with the money, and American people would suffer. And he goes in, state and local governments have abdicated their responsibility to oversee Americans' election process. Not only have they turned the job over to political parties, but they take money from taxpayers to pay for those party functions. Because of the activists who demand loyalty and see compromising as selling out, dominant party primaries and conventions, candidates who seek their permission to be on the November ballot find themselves under great pressure to take hardline positions. This tendency towards rigidity and the party system that enable it is the root of today's political dysfunction. That's what I was just talking about. Those are the rules. The rules are set up. If you want to be part of the game, you have to play by our rules. You can't think, you can't question. If we have a 10-point platform, you have to follow that 10-point platform. If our platform says abortion is a total woman's right to choose, a 14, 15-year-old girl doesn't have to tell her parents and before she gets an abortion, if that's the party line, that's the party line. You have to go along with it. If I go and say, well, I have 3 daughters and 2 granddaughters, and if they got pregnant, I would like to be involved and I would like to be helped out. Again, I would then have to go against my principles as a dad and a grandfather and say, nope, totally unlimited. The party platform says the government should not be involved whatsoever. If a 14-year-old girl wants to have an abortion, she should be able to have an abortion without asking for her parents' permission. So there's one of the things. Do I go against one of my core principles just to get party votes? And one of those, once you go against your core principles to get the money, you can't go back. That's a start. It goes 1, and then this is your first one. Then the second one gets easier, and the third one gets easier, and the fourth one gets easier. And it's like a little kid telling a lie, and you get away with it. The next lie is bigger, and the next lie is bigger, and the next lie is even bigger. And so what I like right here, in 2010, California voted to create an open primary system in which every candidate for a particular office, regardless of party, will appear on the same ballot, and every voter who wishes to participate, also regardless of the party, will be able to choose among them. With the top 2 will advance to the general election, even if they belong to the same party. Louisiana has long used a 2-party everybody run system. Washington State adopted the similar one in 2004. Their voters have a much wider range of options. Just think it, if the 2 best candidates on the ballot happen to be Democrats, why can't you choose from them? If the 2 best candidates on the ballot was 2 Republicans or 2 independents, why can't we vote for that? Because if it's 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans, and if the party picks 1 Republican and the voters vote for another Republican, that second Republican or that second Democrat would not owe his or her loyalty to the party, but would owe his or her loyalty to the people that elected him. Same way with independents. The worst thing that either party wants to have is an independent senator or congressman. Maine had an independent governor for quite a while, and he was quite successful. The people of Maine enjoyed him. And one of the things that that kind of irritates me. If it's a Republican primary and it's a Democratic primary, why are we, the taxpayers, paying all kinds of money so the Democrats or the Republicans can hold their primaries? It makes no sense to me at all. Plain and simple, if it's a Democratic primary for the Democrats to pick their one person or the Republicans to pick their one person, shouldn't they be paying the state of New Hampshire or the other states to do these primaries? Plain and simple. The Republicans and the Democrats, they go to the State House, try to pass laws to say who can vote and which one can vote in a primary, and then they want the taxpayers to pay for everything. No. If the Democrats and the Republicans are spending billions of dollars on these campaigns, I don't think the taxpayers of the United States or the Senate or the state should be paying for these parties. It's a specific party function. If we're going to have an open primary where the top two get on, yes, I can see the state paying for it. But I cannot see the state paying for a Republican primary or paying for a Democratic primary. Plain and simple, those are completely party functions, and I think the parties should be paying for it. That's just my personal opinion, and I just think it should happen that way. Okay, so we're going to go on to something that's a little bit more deeper, and basically right now we're going to talk about veterans and trying to get jobs. When you go through the history, veterans of World War II, veterans of World War I, II, Korea, and even veterans of Vietnam did not suffer the same unemployment rate that veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq are doing. Right now, basically about 12% of all the veterans are unemployed. And that is kind of, I'd call it, a deceitful number because a lot of places, if you go to school part-time, you're not working, so you don't count in the numbers. You go to school full-time, you don't count in the numbers. So if you're going to school, taking the GI Bill, going full-time, yes, your education's getting paid for and you have a little extra money, but if you're trying to find a part-time job or you're trying to find a full-time job to supplement it, you're not, and you're not really counting, because what's happening is going to school full-time is considered employment. Another thing that's happening really seriously problem is that women veterans. Okay, women veterans are not supposed to serve in combat, but I think it's almost 100 veterans, maybe a little bit more, women who've been killed in the war zone. Women are right there on the front lines. Women were doing a lot of the convoy runs in Iraq, and you had the IEDs and you had other problems. You had the ambushes. Now the women are coming back and they're finding it really tough to get jobs. I've seen numbers, I don't think they're supportive, that up to 30% of the women veterans can't find jobs. But I would think the women veterans might be pretty close to the men as a supportive one, but even then, 12–15% of the women not be able to get jobs. You know, plain and simple, that really sucks, and it really is not fair to what we're asking about men and women. And basically, even we go here, Raul Montero always wanted to go to college to be a teacher. However, he turns 30 today and he still hasn't completed his bachelor's degree. He's actually jobless and living off his savings in Poughkeepsie, New York. 10 years ago, Montero joined the Army because after 2 years of community college, he wanted to be able to go school tuition free. But unlike when I was in the military, where you could take classes after school or on the weekend, a lot of these young men and women, didn't have the opportunity to take classes. You don't take classes in Afghanistan or Iraq. And the guy from Jose Luis Santos, an assistant professor at UCLA, the principal investigator for veterans research in the post 9/11 GI Bill, he said according to the latest data available, this is from 2001, only about 30% of veterans are using their education benefits. The data is supposed to be updated every 10 years, but it hasn't been published, so we don't know what the number is, and I think chances are, I think the number is going to be much lower. Jose Gonzalez is another veteran who's been looking for jobs for the past 6 months. I look for work all day, he says. My military background doesn't really apply to commercial planes, just military ones, so it doesn't count for much. Montero said he was lucky that the Army assigned him as a staff writer and photographer during his deployment to Baghdad in 2006. The one experience that made him decide he wanted to be a war correspondent. So he's now taking advantage of GI Bill and is waiting to attend Columbia in the fall to finish his bachelor's degree and pursue in the field. And I am looking for part-time work because of the situation I'm in, or a temporary full-time job, or an even internship. He says he's got money from the GI Bill, and but it doesn't cover any times off like spring break. So during the summer or other ones, he doesn't get paid. And basically, if you're going to Columbia, you know the guy's no idiot. If he's going to Columbia, you know he's up there in the top 10%. And so, again, we need to start doing something for our veterans. And this was from MSN Latino, NBC Latino edition, so that's why those two names are Hispanic. And we got right here, Troy Tyson Akers. He went straight out of high school, spent 8 years in the infantry, taking 4 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. He left the military in February 2011 because he wanted to spend more time with his young children. But your job was to go out, basically your job was to go out and be on the front lines and pray to God nothing ever happened to you. He says that's hard to translate that over to the civilian world. And there are plenty of roadblocks preventing veterans from getting civilian jobs, including a lack of job-seeking skills, mismatch between military experience and civilian requirements. It goes, young veterans may lack the experience crafting a resume or handling a job interview. After emerging from years in jargon-filled military culture, they may have a hard time explaining how their military experience would benefit a civilian employee. They undersell themselves. They don't see and have a good handle on how to self-promote. And to me, that's crap. Plain and simple, it's total crap. Because there are people out there that can write your resume. There's been military headhunters there for years. Even when I was in the military years ago, you tell them what you do, they write it all in civilian jargon. They brief you, they tell you how to handle an interview. Some of them will even set you up with different companies to get the interview. Akers, who lives in State Center, Iowa, thought it wouldn't be too hard to get a job for a security guard while he attended Iowa State University full-time with support from the GI Bill. Again, quality school. Instead, over the past 13 months, he's endured rejections after rejections as employees told him that they had more qualified candidates. His wife, Amanda, said one prospective employer said, even told him his deployments don't count as security experience. Again, it's bullcrap. Recently got a potential break, a job interview with another former Marine as a security company run by veterans. And another guy went to drive for Ryder. Ryder said, the vice president of government relations with Ryder, said veterans need a civilian commercial license and the requirements vary state by state. Some require hundreds of hours of training and military experience may not count. In other cases, the veterans may be able to waiver the training but have trouble getting a truck for the test. Well, plain and simple, I spent plenty of time in the military. We kept track of the guys' hours driving. We kept track of the hours of the mechanics, the heavy equipment operators. So yes, when they got out of the military, they had a portfolio saying how many hours and all this kind of stuff. Some of the guys got out that worked for me qualified for apprentice based on their hours. Other ones qualified right from journeyman. A lot of the unions and stuff have the standard. They accept them. Plain and simple. One, he goes, yes, each state may have CDL, different licenses, but you know what? Just like each state has different driver's license. When we go for our test, we go for our test. And again, getting a truck, you know what? If plain and simple, if riders were so interested in hiring the veterans and everyone qualified for this, I'm pretty sure Ryder could come up with a truck for a day for the individual to take his exam. Again, what I think is happening, we have so many people who never served in the military. The fact is that, as they say, 1 or 2% of Americans served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's really other people's war. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people who are coming up with reasons not to hire, and basically, they talk about supporting the vets. They talk about how we support. They put a flag lapel on and they do this and they do that and they wave the flag. But when it comes time to hiring the veterans, it just isn't happening. And so it just isn't the right thing to do. If you don't want to hire veterans, don't hire veterans. But be honest about it that you're not going to hire veterans. And so now we're going to talk about something a little down and dirty. We've heard about Staff Sergeant Bale, who's the Army Staff Sergeant, is accused of murdering 16 people, but they said he's going to be tried for 17 counts. I got an article from the New Yorker from what I got. It was August of 2008, September 2008, and it's entitled "The Last Tour." I bet you very few people, if any, have heard of Travis Twigg, 36-year-old Marine Staff Sergeant. He had 1 tour in Afghanistan, 4 tours in Iraq, and in January 2008, he wrote an article in the Marine Corps Gazette about his struggle with PTSD. PTSD, the war within. We have a picture of him. He's right here in the White House, and he's with President Bush. And there's this picture to the family of Staff Sergeant Travis Twigg, United States Marine Corps. We respect and appreciation, George Bush. And 3 weeks after he met with George Bush, he drove out to the Grand Canyon with his brother, another veteran, and they tried to do a Thelma and Louise and tried to drive into the Grand Canyon. Their vehicle got hung up, and they got out. And they ended up stealing a car. They had a 38, stole the car. And later on, Travis shot his cousin in the head, and then he shot himself in the head, committing suicide. This all happened 3 weeks after he had this picture with the President of the United States. And people go in and it says, why? And here it is, just think. 5 tours. Okay, 5 tours. If the average on the Marine Corps is 7, that's 35 months. Basically, this young man served 3 years in combat. And I don't care how strong you are. I don't care if you're Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Terminator. 3 years is going to change you. You're not coming back. And so he enlisted in 1993. He got out of the out and he re-enlisted in 1999. Got married. And he came back in the Marine Corps in 2001, January of 2001. So between January 2001 and September of 2008, he had 5 combat tours with the Marines. And 5 combat tours with the Marines is not sticking in the background. It's not having a good time. He served in Fallujah province. He served in Fallujah. He served in Anbar province. And so he lost 2 men who were, he went to his commanding officer and says, you know, this is dangerous, this is dangerous. They didn't listen to him, and 2 of the men died when a round came in while they were going to the bathroom. And so Dr. Jonathan Shea, a PTSD specialist, thinks that calling it a disorder is misleading. PTSD, he says, is an injury, not a psychological disorder. It's an injury. There are degrees of damage ranging from standard combat stress, which can be treated with a few days rest, to full-blown complex PTSD, which is very difficult to treat, let alone cure. It is best understood, though, as a psychic wound that can be crippling, even fatal, with its myriad of complications. It goes, basically nearly 20% of those who have served are suffering from PTSD or major depression, and in most cases, in many more cases, are expected to surface in the years ahead. This elevated rate is generally attributed to the rigors of a long war being fought without the draft, multiple deployments, and heavy use of National Guard and Guard Reserve. And again, a lot of cases, if you go and complain, you're viewed as weakness, no matter what they tend to tell the government, or the government tells the press. These guys are being pretty pushed. When Dr. Ira Kratz, the Department of Veterans Affairs Chief of Medical Service, learned earlier this year, 2008, that preliminary internal report suggested that 1,000 veterans in VA care were attempting suicide each month, he sent a colleague an email saying, "Shush, this is something we should carefully address ourselves in some sort of release before anybody stumbles on it." Another email written in March 2008 by Dr. Nora J. Perez, a PTSD program coordinator in Texas, says, given that we are having more and more compensation-seeking veterans, I would like to suggest that you refrain from giving a diagnosis of PTSD straight out. Here it is, the VA, whose responsibility is to treat the veterans. One individual is saying, hey, you know what, we've got all these veterans trying to commit suicide. We have to manage it, massage it, and how do we get a press release out so it doesn't look too bad before someone else? This other doctor working for the VA says, you know what, these PTSD guys, they're going to ask for money because they have problems. And so what we need to do is, I would like to suggest that you refrain from giving a diagnosis of PTSD. And here it is. She is making a financial decision for the VA as the result of the veterans. And the other guy is saying up to 1,000 veterans a month. It could be up and down, but even 100 veterans, 200 veterans a month are trying to commit suicide, because you get another one who's saying we're not going to classify him as PTSD because we don't want to pay. And basically, when the staff sergeant, his sergeant major recognized the symptoms, they sent him to a physician assistant who prescribed antidepressant drugs like Zoloft. And basically, he was taking 10 pills a day. It then got up to 19, according to his wife. Then he was mixing them with alcohol as he tried to forget about the deaths of the 2 Lance Corporals. And basically, his wife was saying he was getting medicated over and over and over again, and he was going around as a zombie. He got to go back to Iraq and Afghanistan. He felt comfortable, and he felt at home, and he felt relaxed. That's unfortunate. And because he had these problems, he was passed over for promotion. Despite all these tours, he wasn't able to make it. And so you just sit there and they just go, what is going on? What is going on? And people go, nope, hey, what are we going to do for our veterans? And this, I think, one of the reasons is that people are not getting hired is because a lot of veterans are suffering from some form or some degree of PTSD. They're depressed, and people are hearing about it, so people are saying, you know what? Why should I take a risk and allow one of these individuals to work for me? If one of them, quote unquote, goes postal, what am I going to do? Plain and simple. So why take the risk? Let's find an excuse not to hire these young men or women. The second part is if you go into an interview and you're a little depressed, you're a little bit down, it's not going to be good. They want someone chipper and pepper up. And so one of those, you make a job appointment interview. If it's 2 o'clock on Thursday the 13th, you can't go and say, you know what, I need to reschedule. You reschedule, you have no opportunity for the job. So I think we need to, as a nation, man up and say, hey, we've asked a hell of a lot of these young men and women, and we need to take care of them. We need to give them the treatment. If they need some of the money to help them as they're going, instead of so many of them, I read the articles, are taking minimum wage job. One guy who's getting a minimum wage job is working in a potato chip factory. A lot of these guys are not even making the amount of money they made in the military, which is sad, and it should be embarrassing as a nation. So enough of that. I will get off my soapbox for the time being. Like I said, it irritates me. But since Easter is coming up, I have a small clip on Easter and, again, stuff from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And so a lot Madonna and the Child, Christ's crucifixion and stuff. And so for all the Christians out there, I just hope you can enjoy this and, again, have a happy Easter. And so hope you enjoy the clip. Well, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the clip. Trying to do things a little bit different, so it's not always the same way. And so what we're going to do right now is continue to talk about the budget. I know I've talked about it a couple of times in the past, and I know I kind of depressed Ernie back here when we go over some of the numbers. And the reason I go over the numbers and trying to get a little deeper in the numbers is because I hate being treated like an idiot or ignoramus, and I think too many of our politicians, especially at the federal level, treat us as if we're idiots. And I know we're not idiots, and again, it's hopefully to help people ask some of these questions. And so I think we need to ask these questions, because if we don't ask these questions and get an answer, we can't help solve the problem. I've always had a philosophy: I don't care how bad it is, just tell me how bad it is and I'll come up with a way to help solve the problem. But I can't solve any problem if I don't know how bad it is. And so we're going to do 3. And basically right now, at any day now, our debt, U.S. debt is going to be $16 trillion. And so what we're going to do, these charts, is 12 trillion. Basically, the government owes each other, the government owes money to Social Security. So it goes back and forth, back and forth. But I'm going to say, okay, 75% of it, 12 trillion that we owe to like China and Japan and banks and everything, Korea, Indonesia. And so what happened is, I says, let's put on a 30-year payoff. What kind of like people can understand as a 30-year mortgage. And so the 30-year mortgage would go from 2012 to 2042. And to give you an idea, if we do 30 years, my oldest grandson will be 41 years old, and my youngest grandson would be 33 years old. If the interest rate, and I put 3%, 4%, 6% interest rate, just based on the first year, to keep it simple, we as the American taxpayers would have to pay $50.6 billion every single month just to cover the payments. 60 billion if it was 4.5, 72 billion if it was 60, if it was 6%. On a year, for example, $607 billion, 729 billion, 806 at 6% to try to pay off 75% of our budget. And again, this is projected on, for the next 30 years, all our budgets would be balanced. Our yearly budgets would be balanced. We would not be adding anything to the budget. It's not going to happen. The yearly deficit's going to keep adding. And so every year for the next 30 years, we'd have to pay $400 billion in principal, interest, 207, 329, at 6%, $463 billion a year just in interest. How would that work out? The new budget that's coming out, plain and simple, rounding it off, the federal government expects to spend $3.5 trillion. And it expects revenue, taxes, fees, royalties to come out $2.5 trillion. So there's a $1 trillion deficit right there. At 3%, basically for every $100 that we spend, $17.30 will go to principals and interest to pay off the budget. 4% is $20.80. 6% is $24.60. But now if we just go on revenue, and basically what I'm doing is I'm keeping them in current dollars, not doing inflation, not all, because I'm just going to make the assumption if our expense inflation goes up 3%, we find a way to increase revenue by 3%, so it stays pretty much the same. But on revenue, which means every $100 in revenue that we collected, $24 would go to pay off the debt, $29 and $34. And that's a heck of a lot of money. Just think at 6% for every $100. Just think, if for every $100 you made, if you had to pay $24.60, that's before taxes, all this other kind of stuff, you would have to pay $24, basically a quarter out of every dollar that you made, you would have to pay off on one loan. Okay, so like I showed you that it was going up about $1 trillion a year. And so let's say that Congress is pretty weak. They completely lack courage, and they decide that they're going to go and say, you know what, we're going to wait until after the 2017 election. So we start this at 16 trillion from 17 to 47. My grandkids will be 46 to 38. Look at the numbers. At 6%, $46 out of every $100 that we spent would have to go for principal and interest. Look at this, 277, 440, $617 billion a year in interest. At 6%, we would have to pay $1.5 trillion a year just to pay off, for a year, just $1.5 trillion a year to help pay off the debt. And plus, we're still going to have over $5-6 trillion in debt left. Now here comes the scary part. We keep talking about 10 years out. That's what the Congressional Budget Office does, 10 years out. So, okay, let's say we don't stop paying off until 2022 again, so my oldest grandson will be 51 and youngest will be 43. Basically, we're looking at about $24 trillion in debt, and so say we're going to pay off $20 trillion. At 3%, $84 billion, 101, 6%, $120 billion every month that we would have to go. The yearly payment, $1 trillion, $1.2 trillion, $1.5 trillion. Look at interest, $331 billion, $552, $774. And the way Congress, and they're doing right now, they'll find a way not to pay this. They will keep going, rolling over the money every 90 days, basically 90-day bonds, 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, 30-year bonds. But even if they found a way to do it, basically, that's $774 billion a year in interest alone. So if you look at it, again, 28, 34, $41 of every penny of every dollar that every $100 that we spend, basically in 2022, again, with no increase in the in the next 30 years, no increase whatsoever in the debt, because this is based on the deficit being balanced every year, zeroed out. $41.10 on every dollar we spent would go just to pay interest and interest in the debt. If we base it on a $2.5 trillion that we bring in, even at 3%, $40 of every dollar that we bring in would have to go and pay principal and interest. If it went up to 6%, it's $57.60. And so it's serious. And because it's serious, people running for Congress don't want to talk about us. They don't want to talk about it. They want to view us that we're ignorant, we don't know, there's nothing going to happen, everything is going to do good. Congress is talking about cutting $1 trillion. They ain't talking about $1 trillion isn't going to solve the problem if you're looking at $1 trillion a year that you're going to have to pay in principal and interest. So again, don't want to upset Ernie, but you know what it is? It's just, we're just trying to get the truth out there, and hopefully you can ask questions. And so again, this is the end of today's show. It went kind of quick, and so what we'll do is we'll see you out there on the long road, and again, have a happy Easter.